Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk about some of the nonsense that is part of American history. We have a habit of perpetuating our history in the most unique ways. I've always looked at American history as being 70% fact, and I might be being very generous here, and 30% good for growing tomatoes, which means about 30% and maybe even 40% of our history is pure fabrication. So much has been just told as a story, and after a while, we really start to think it's true. In a way, you might say that we have turned American history on its ear without fact. In fact, we have faith in our history. It's sort of like going to a great big creationist museum on history. I can't think of a better way to describe it. Not based on fact, but based on a kind of a flimsy theory without any fact behind it. But in American history, oh, where should we start? All of the nonsense dealing with the founding of this country. The fact is that most people in this country weren't looked at as worthy to be part of this country. There's only a handful of people that were really in charge. They had to be white men, they had to be landowners, and lastly, they had to have money. If you didn't have money, of course you were not part of the whole thing. If you were not white, you did not have a part in any of it. If you were not male, you did not have a part of it. And so I love the line by Thomas Jefferson that all men are created equal. As long as they have money, as long as they have property, and as long as they're white. That is what he meant. If you're black, well, forget it. You're a slave anyway. If you're a woman, you're basically look good for taking care of the master, your husband, and producing children, and cooking and cleaning. You have no rights. In fact, even if you had money, if you married a man who had no money, he got all your money because you weren't a woman. This is how the country started. You wouldn't know that. It's a little frightening. Another thing that I find rather objectionable at times is Abraham Lincoln. We have turned him into a god, into a deity, when he was basically a ruthless politician. He understood people were stupid, and he gave speeches so he could attract the stupid. You know that old saying, you can fool some of the people some of the time, and well, the whole thing is that whole saying, well, Lincoln never said it anyway, so it doesn't matter. But Lincoln did fool a lot of the people all the time. He was a calculating politician. He was ruthless. The last thing he had much interest in, to be perfectly honest, is religion. And of course, he used religion constantly because he realized that's how you reach the average person because, well, he likes God, therefore he has to be good. Lincoln knew that. He sounds somewhat like a biblical prophet in a lot of his speeches. Whoa, 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 whoa. And he goes on and on and on. Judge not that we be judged, etc. That's not the way Lincoln was in real life. But Lincoln, the politician, understood. You have to talk in the vernacular of the less intelligent. And he was very successful in that. Was he a good man? Was he a good politician? He was a good politician. An all right man. I mean, he's not this saint. He could be vicious, he could be ruthless. He condemned lots of Native Americans to be killed. And he also lied a lot. No one could lie with greater conviction than Abraham Lincoln. And we have deified him. In fact, what we have done, we've kind of made him like a historic display. In fact, a lot of these people we've kind of made like a historic display that has a big sign in front saying, "Do not touch," because they're deities. Well, my philosophy is this: bullshit. Bullshit was bullshit 100 years ago, and it should be said to be so. George Washington had the teeth of his slaves pulled out. Of course, he gave them money for their teeth to make the teeth for his dentures. That's cruel. Well, you got to remember who George Washington was. He was a rather pampered, aggressive, land grabbing individual who did everything in his power to make sure he got his name out. He did everything in his power to be famous. He wanted that. Granted, he went through hell. I'm not saying he didn't. But George wanted that. He wanted every office he held. And he really wasn't too great a general. But nonetheless, he liked the job he held. As president, he was a reactionary president. He was not a proactive president. Granted, no one had ever been president before, so what he would do is do very little and only react when something happened. Of course, he refused to spend a lot of time in church. When he went to church in New York, he went to St. Paul's Chapel, and halfway through the service, when they were ready to give communion, he would always get up and walk out because he didn't want to be part of that part of the service, which he thought was foolish. And he was a deist, of course. He used God. He realized once again, how stupid do we have to be to realize that people who are in power are going to do everything in their power to look good to the average person. All the way up to our most current president, they mention God. We put it on our coinage. In God we trust. Theodore Roosevelt tried to get it off because he thought it was too stupid. It was put on by Salmon Chase, by the way, if you're ever wondering where In God We Trust comes from. He was part of the Lincoln administration. Lincoln was too busy with the war. Salmon Chase put it on the 2-cent piece. That was the first piece that had In God We Trust. There's an awful lot of our history that is really screwed up. I mean, it goes on and on and on. I'm just mentioning Washington, Lincoln. Look at the various wars. Look at the founding of this country. Look at the Vietnam War. I mean, we made up the attack so we could expand the war. Look at World War II. We made a lot of people a lot nastier looking than they actually were. Look at World War I. That was a pure bullshit war. There was no reason to have a war. And the Treaty of Versailles was just a promise that there would be another. And we had a president at that time who was a rather frightful individual named Woodrow Wilson, who wouldn't bend, therefore he broke. And in even more recent times, I mean, I don't know how much of our history is really true. You know, you reach a point that you kind of see that a lot that has been said, and a lot that has been told us, and a lot that has been written and taken as dogma is good for growing tomatoes. In other words, it's a pile of shit. And I find that so very true about a lot of our history. And when the day finally comes that we can actually do a good cleaning of our history and get rid of a lot of the garbage that's in there, if I see another picture of George Washington praying in Valley Forge, I will get ill. That story was made up by Parson Weems, the same guy who made up the story about chopping down the cherry tree. It is just as fake as that other story. But of course, what can I say? That's history.